Safe and sound, stuck in the ground, too lost to be found. You're just asleep, and it's time to leave. Come on, rise up, take a breath, you're alive now. Can't you hear the voice of Jesus calling us out from the grave like Lazarus? You're brand new, the power of death couldn't hold you. Can't you hear the voice of Jesus calling us out from the grave like Lazarus? Rise up, rise up, rise up, out from the grave like Lazarus. When he said your name, the thing that filled your veins was more than blood. It's the kind of love that washes sin away. Now the door is open wide, and the stone's been rolled aside. The old is gone, the light has come, so come on and rise up. Take a breath, you're alive now. Can't you hear the voice of Jesus calling us out from the grave like Lazarus? You're brand new, the power of death couldn't hold you. Can't you hear the voice of Jesus calling us out from the grave like Lazarus? Rise up, rise up, rise up, out from the grave like Lazarus. He's calling us to walk out from the dark. He's giving us new resurrected brand new hearts. He's calling us to walk out of the dark. He's giving us new resurrected brand new. So come on and rise up. Take a breath, you're alive now. Can't you hear the voice of Jesus calling us out from the grave like Lazarus? You're brand new, the power of death couldn't hold you. Can't you hear the voice of Jesus calling us out from the grave like Lazarus? Rise up, rise up, rise up, out from the grave like Lazarus. Rise up, rise up, rise up, out from the grave like Lazarus.
Well, Lazarus' song would be kind of pointless if we weren't in John chapter 11. Not pointless, but topical. I believe we left off, Harold said he didn't want to read chapter 11, 1 through 41, because it was a big chunk of Scripture. So that's where we're going to pick up this morning. And I asked Harold to play that song that Praise and Harmony recorded, Rise Up Lazarus, in the dark and all alone, growing comfortable. Are you too scared? Yep. Buried underneath the lies that you believe, safe and sound, tucked in the ground, too lost to be found. You're just asleep. I really think the lyrics are pretty fitting on that, because it's a call to us too, to be dead in our sins and to be alive and raised in Christ. So, John chapter 11, we're going to go ahead and read a big chunk here. We're going to go to verse 41. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, This illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this he said to the disciples, Let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you. Are you going there again? Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. After saying these things, he said to them, Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he'll never recover, or he will recover. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought meant taking a rest and sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off. And many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him. But Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. When she said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher is here and is calling for you. When she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were in the house with her, consoling her, Mary, rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going up to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was at, she saw him. She fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. So the Jews said, see how he loved them. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also kept this man from dying? Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said, Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he's been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you've heard me. So we'll stop there. And if you're following along in the commentary, we are on page 83. Section titled Disbelief in Death. Do you think that Martha answered Jesus' question fully in verse 27? I feel like she kind of misdirected the answer. She said, well, I believe you're the Christ. Which is still a pretty bold statement, I think.
So you ready for a comment already?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bold statement because the other one is absolutely ludicrous, right? Mm-hmm. And it's, I mean, in human terms. Yep. Like, yes, I believe that you're the Christ, the Son of God, who's coming into the world. She didn't say, yes, I believe that we will literally never die. What are you talking about? Mm-hmm. You know, because that's ludicrous in the human.
Because he's definitely not going to raise the guy from the dead.
Right, definitely.
Nobody's done that.
Nobody's done that.
Yeah.
Jordan, can you speak to that?
Resurrection?
Yeah.
Well, Martha did.
I know, but it's never mentioned in the Old Testament. They talk about, you die, you go to the grave, the worms, all that kind of stuff. So it's never mentioned.
That's a very good point. I don't know if I have a great answer for that. Dan, you got an answer for that? Okay. Yeah.
Never resurrection verbiage, but rather like Abraham's bosom, Sheol. Yeah, I don't know. Good question, Terry.
Yeah, that is a good question. Think about the parable, Lazarus and the rich man. Not this Lazarus. Yeah. But again, that concept probably, maybe, and again, pure speculation. Maybe Brenda has some commentary on that. But the doctrine of resurrection. So why is Martha addressing that I know he'll rise on the last day? Because that wasn't taught in the Old Testament. I don't believe it all. So where did they get that idea? And it may be that maybe they debated, because maybe the teachers at the time talked about that, or maybe there was a guy teaching a gospel resurrection. Maybe John talked about, who knows? I don't know. Okay. Mm-hmm. 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 That's a good point. Mm-hmm. So Brenda pointed out Elijah and Enoch. So he was no more. He didn't walk on the earth. He's taken up, right? She's saying there is teaching of resurrection in the Old Testament, but a lot of people wouldn't grasp that idea. So I don't think that's a thorough answer, Terry, but mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very good. Very good point, Brenda. So maybe we can come back to that question next week, and I'll put that on Harold to answer that. We'll continue with our commentary on page 83 here. Disbelief and death. The 11th chapter of the Gospel of John has become famous among Bible readers, students, and teachers as the chapter that records the 7th and climatic miracle performed by Jesus. That is, raising Lazarus from the dead. However, the primary focus is not Lazarus or his resurrection. Lazarus is the supporting cast that really puts the spotlight on the main attraction. That is wisdom and the power of God demonstrated by the man Jesus Christ. In this chapter, there's a common thread of disbelief that Jesus attempts to rectify by showing his authority over death. Sickness has arrived in Bethany, attacking the body of a friend of Jesus named Lazarus. Mary and Martha, the sisters of Lazarus, loved Jesus, and aware of his ability to heal, sent a messenger to Jesus, "Come visit our brother." The message sent stated, "He whom you love is sick." Perhaps the sisters are suggesting in the message, while Jesus is traveling and healing strangers, surely he'll come to Bethany to heal, not simply someone he knows, but someone he loves. It seems the sisters are attempting to manipulate Jesus, causing him to redirect his plans to come to Bethany. When the messenger arrived, Jesus responded by saying, "Sickness not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified by it." When Jesus made this statement, Lazarus was already dead. After receiving the message, Jesus remained where he was for an additional 2 days. When Jesus arrived in Bethany, Lazarus had been dead 4 days. In order to account for a 4-day delay to town that takes only 1 day of travel would mean Lazarus died the same day the messenger came to Jesus. Day 2 would be when the messenger returned to Bethany with Jesus' words, "The sickness is not unto death." Staying an additional 2 days, day 3 and day 4, he and his disciples traveled to Bethany, so the glory of God may be displayed to his supporters and his critics. Jesus informed his disciples the purpose of their visit to Bethany is to wake Lazarus out of his sleep. This statement confused the disciples because they thought Jesus was referencing literal sleep. If it were literal sleep, then naturally he would awake before the disciples traveled the entire day on dusty roads. However, it happened on many occasions in the past with his listeners, and now with his disciples, the words of Jesus have been misunderstood. Perhaps this is because Jesus was speaking in a spiritual context, and the disciples were listening with carnal understanding. To open the minds of his disciples, Jesus explained sleep for a believer is simply a form of rest and not condemnation. However, meeting them in their way of thinking, he says plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and I am glad for your sakes I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." This first occurrence of disbelief that is mentioned in the chapter occurs with his disciples. The disciples believed Jesus was a great teacher and a masterful healer, but they had no confidence in his authority over death. These were the same men that witnessed water being turned into wine, the commandment for healing of a nobleman's son, the healing of the lame man at Bethesda, and participated in feeding the 5,000 plus with 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread, witnessed him walking on water and calming the storm, opening the eyes of the man born blind, but not convinced that he, their teacher, could be effective at a burial site for a man who'd been dead for 4 days. To them, he was too late. There's a note in here. Walking by sight requires seeing it before believing. Walking by faith requires believing before you see it. The disciples' belief reduced Jesus to being a great healer, but not the Messiah, with power over death. Thus, Jesus says to them, I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe. This statement suggests that Jesus and his disciples arrived in Jerusalem while Lazarus was sick because of his love for Lazarus. He would have done exactly what the disciples predicted he would do. He would have healed him. But a 4-day delay to Bethany will change their belief in God forever. When it was announced that Jesus was near Bethany, Martha, one of the sisters of Lazarus, left the house to meet him, while Mary stayed home with those who came to console them over their brother. Martha reached Jesus and expressed her disappointment with Jesus, saying, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. This became a very profound statement, communicating Martha's anger and blame towards Jesus not healing her brother. She too, as the disciples, viewed Jesus as a masterful healer and believed that he would come to Bethany to heal Lazarus, preventing him from dying. And there's another note here. Man can arrive late to a bad situation and cannot intervene. However, when God appears, it's never too late, but always the right time. Martha further expresses her continued trust in him as teacher and healer, saying, even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. This statement is perhaps against the background that she does not expect anything to happen or for her brother to be resuscitated, but she didn't want to be disrespectful to the teacher. It's easy to express what we believe when we do not expect to demonstrate that belief. Jesus challenged the validity of Martha's statement, stating her brother will rise again. Again, restricting Jesus to a healer, she attempts to find comfort in pointing to the last day event called resurrection. Jesus opened her eyes to the disbelief she had in him, being able to intervene in this unfortunate situation. Jesus' response to Martha revealed that she had placed her comfort and confidence not in the teacher and healer, but in the last day resurrection. Jesus now teaches her again, explaining the day and event she's looking for, called the resurrection, is standing right in front of her. He replied, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me shall live, even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? There's a note. Death is never referenced as the cessation of life. It is always a form of separation. Physical death is a separation of the soul from the body. Spiritual death is a separation of the soul from God. Martha's response to Jesus' belief challenged her to give an almost expected response of a Bible student to their teacher. Although she did not believe the statement, she stated, yes, Lord, I have believed that you are the Christ, the Son of God, even he who comes into the world. However, she did not believe this statement. After all, the Christ and or the Son of God would have authority over death. She placed her trust in Jesus, the healer, not Jesus, the resurrection. Leaving his presence, she goes to Mary, her sister, telling her the teacher wants to talk with her. Hearing Martha, Mary leaves with a crowd following her, comes to Jesus, and almost rehearsing the encounter Martha just had with Jesus, Mary came and fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you've been here, my brother would not have died. Jesus is confronted with another embrace of disbelief that he is more than a teacher and a healer. He experienced it with his disciples. I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe. With Martha, Lord, if you've been here, my brother would not have died. And again with Mary and the Jews that followed her to meet him. Seeing the weeping and the disbelief of people, he was deeply moved in spirit and was troubled. The phrase deeply moved in spirit can be translated as agitated. The people, through their behavior, expressed their unbelief that Jesus could do anything about the sadness of the people and the death of Lazarus. This uncommitted approach to belief angered and agitated Jesus, and through frustration he responded, where have you laid him? The next verse, only 2 words, is so profound that it requires its own verse. Notice it's not a continuation of the previous verse, but a statement that stands all alone, showing the humanity of Jesus. Jesus wept. Now it's important to understand that Jesus did not weep over the death of Lazarus. Jesus knew the day Lazarus died, he was going to Bethany to raise him from the dead. Also, considering he is the creator over all things, including death, he would not weep over something he created. However, his weeping seems to be dualistic in nature. One, Jesus has walked into an environment where people are filled with the emotion of sadness and are crying over their loss. The humanity of Jesus is able to relate to their pain. As our high priest, he's touched and moved, causing him to weep. The Hebrew writer pens, "For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin." Hebrews 4:15. Secondly, we must ask the question, what would break the heart of our Creator and cause him to weep? And the answer is the one thing the Creator cannot make you do. That is, he cannot make you believe. Again, the people have expressed amongst one another how they believed he could have prevented Lazarus from dying. Angered again, in verse 38, John comes to the tomb of Lazarus, commanding the stone to be removed from the cave. Martha provides a disclaimer, informing Jesus that after 4 days, there's sure to be a foul smell. As priest, he is risking by being defiled by coming into contact with the dead. Jesus responded sternly and said, "Did I not say to you, if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" Now with the crowd watching, Jesus stands in front of the cave and demonstrates his authority as King of Kings. Jesus does not go into the tomb to raise Lazarus to the dead, but he prays to his Father as the King and speaks in official degree, saying, "Lazarus, come forth." I was going to say, it says, did I miss a reading section here, or is it not in there? Well, I went to 41, right? Well, we probably should continue reading. Let's pause there. And again, open it up for commentary. I think Brenda's got, I don't know if Brenda had something there. We'll stop at that paragraph there on page 88 and read the rest of the account of Lazarus being resurrected. All right. We'll read verse 41. So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they might believe that you sent me." And when he said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he did, believed in him. But some went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered to the council, and they said, "What are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone's going to believe in him. And the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." But one of them, Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die than the people, not the whole nation, should perish." He didn't say this of his own accord, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, not for the nation only, but to gather in one the children of God who are scattered abroad, so that day they made plans to put him to death. Jesus therefore no longer walked openly among the Jews, but went from their region near the wilderness to a town called Ephraim, and there he stayed with his disciples. Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and many went up to the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. They were looking for Jesus and saying to one another as they stood in the temple, "What do you think? That he will not come to the feast at all?" Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was, he should let them know so that they might arrest him. Yeah, go ahead, Brenda.
going back to Lazarus being dead and Mary and Martha not understanding, Christ had already risen 2 people from the dead. I don't know whether Mary and Martha did not hear about that, or whether because the others were almost the same day that they died. And so this is 4 days later with the body starting to decay. And I think that was what was really significant for them, because he had already risen 2 people. One of them was very early in his ministry. One of them was middle part, but he had risen 2 people. One of them was on his way to Nain, and one of them was a little girl. But it's sort of like when he fed the 5,000, people couldn't believe that. But then when he fed the 4,000, they still didn't understand that he could do it. It's sort of like they saw it once, but they didn't know whether he could repeat it or didn't comprehend or what. But anyway, the idea was that Mary and Martha, Lazarus was in the grave for 4 days. His body was already decaying, and that is what is significant. Because even I forgot the name of the prophet who raised the bones from the dead. Remember? I mean, it was in the Old Testament. The prophet, he got all the bones and raised them up from the dead and breathed life into them. And so they knew and they understood a little bit of it, but it's sort of like it happened to others and it won't happen to me. I don't know.
Kind of the idea that it doesn't actually happen.
Was that Ezekiel? In the valley of the dry bones? Anyway. On a different note, Harold and I were talking recently about a friend of his, and really heavy in drug addiction all of his adolescence. And then one day he comes to church and is just a different person and apologizing to people, but he didn't stop. He didn't get help for the drug addiction, and it pulled him back in, and worse than before. And it kind of makes me think of the linen strips, the cloths that Lazarus had, because he was dead and stinky and gross, and if he hadn't taken those off, he would have been susceptible to infection, and it would have killed him. So when Jesus does do a miracle and resurrects us, it's important that we change those habits, that we pull them off, because it'll kill us.
It's pretty powerful imagery, you know, because Jesus says, "Come out." I mean, I don't know how they tied him, but I know they've tied their hands probably together, right? I don't know if they tied his feet. Do you think he, you know?
Well, in The Chosen.
Yeah. Sorry. But he's like, unbind him is the very next thing, you know? Because I imagine he couldn't see either. Or if he could, it was very veiled because there's probably several layers of gauze around his, not gauze, but linen. Yeah. I would have to say I think he would know he'd been dead. Personally, that's my opinion. I don't think I've woken up like that before.
Maybe he was just like, man, for the first time in my life, I got some good sleep.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
I just wanted to point out, Jordan, Jesus states that the point, when he's talking to Mary, the point is so that they can believe, that you will believe through these signs and miracles.
Nay.
Yes, I mean, beyond Lazarus, but the point is they do believe in the Lazarus part. They believe in Jesus because of Lazarus being resurrected from the grave, and that's actually the problem. The Jews believing, and so that's why they have to go make this plot to kill him, because let me find it here. In verse 47, what are we to do, for this man performs many signs, and if we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. So the whole point is, indeed they're going to believe in him, so we have to get rid of him, right? It's no longer denying belief for themselves. It's the problem, the worldly problem. Yes. A weird answer, right?
But a lot of it's pointing to Jesus' death. He understood what the sorrow was going to be when he died. He understood what it all meant. And he wanted the people to understand about the resurrection. And this was a very vivid, because it was 4 days in the grave, and Christ would be 3 days in the grave, and he was showing it was possible.
Oh, Courtney. Gotcha.
This might be out of bounds, but does anybody have like a story where you thought it was too far gone? That Jesus couldn't change things?
You have a story to go with Courtney's, or you got something else?
I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just no.
I didn't really hear.
Go for it. Go for it.
Okay, we're at chapter 11, but in context of that, I just wanted to bring a point to you. In chapter 10, where he talks about that he is the good shepherd, he says this in 10:17. Therefore, my Father loves me because I lay my life, I lay down my life, and I will take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down on myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have the power to take it up again. This command I have received from my Father. And then in 11, where does it say? It says his disciples are saying, you're going to go down there? I had it and I lost it. They're worried about that he may be stoned again. So they don't even, and when you get stoned, you die. So he's moving his teaching, and now he gives an object lesson that if he can raise himself, he can definitely raise someone else. So he is just proving his teaching to his disciples, because the disciples couldn't understand that he was going to go there where they wanted to stone him again. But Jesus knows no one's going to take my life until I tell it's time.
Mm-hmm.
And he's told them that.
Yep.
And he told them that. He's just edifying his teaching. It's an lesson.
Yeah. It's a good object lesson. I wish I could do it.
We'll continue reading the rest of page and a half here of the commentary. I'm going to pick up on that note on page 88. We should be able to come forth from challenges that life puts before us based on his words. While the disciples, Martha and Mary, and the Jews surrounded the tomb, perhaps clenched hands, holding their breath, the words of Jesus went into the tomb and released Lazarus from the pain of death. And when Lazarus appeared, wrapped in dead men's clothing, Jesus spoke the words, "Unbind him and let him go." The implication is the living should not wear the apparel of the dead. The same word is true for believers today. Since Jesus is our Savior and he saved us from death, we who are alive should never become comfortable in the dead men clothing of anger, betrayal, envy, jealousy, self-righteousness, or anything alike. This eyewitness event caused many Jews who came to comfort Mary and Martha to believe in Jesus. However, there were some that did not believe, hardening their hearts and sought the envious enemy of Jesus, known as the Pharisees, sharing the details of their eyewitness account of what Jesus had done. The miracle was so profound and undeniable that it stipulated an impromptu council meeting in the Sanhedrin court. It's important to note, just as the United States has the Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin was considered the Supreme Court of the Jews. The council meeting of Jews recognized their myriad plots to discredit and distract Jesus were not effective, but rather caused the people to become more interested in him. But Caiaphas, the high priest, suggested to the council it was expedient for one man to die and preserve the nation. Although he was not aware, Caiaphas' statement prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation. It is this statement of Caiaphas that moves Jesus' death from murder by the Romans to a sacrificial offering for the world, with the approval of the high priest. From that moment, Jesus saw the continual disbelief of the people and rage from the Jewish leaders that he chose to not walk publicly amongst them, for he knew the appointed hour would come for him to fulfill his purpose coming into the world. Miracle after miracle, sermon after sermon, and yet many of the Jews remained comfortable in their spiritual blindness and chose not to believe. However, John reminds us in his gospel that Jesus performed many miracles that are not recorded in his gospel. But the 7 he chose to record are purposely designed to bring the readers to believe in Jesus as Lord.
I'm kind of glad he clarified that, the 7th thing, because, this is the 7th recorded, not the 7th miraculous work of Jesus. Glad he clarified that.
And kind of like Brenda said, there was other instances that we don't have recorded in the Gospel of John. Other instances of resurrection, things of that nature. Well, we're just about out of time. And the next section is only 10 verses, but we'll probably leave that for next week. It's only a couple minutes still. Any more comments to kind of wrap up the class session this morning? Pretty quiet.
I have a comment just regarding moving forward in class after John. Kind of looking for suggestions. One of the suggestions we got was doing a couple weeks of how to study the Bible, study tools. And I don't know if that'll be best fitted on Wednesday night or Sunday morning, my bad. Holly suggested it, and she said Sunday mornings are kind of tough for her to get here for class because she's working. Yeah. So if you guys have other suggestions for Sunday morning class moving forward into the fall, let me know. We've done some really interesting stuff in lots of different ways. So however we can study the Word together would be really incredible. So give me some suggestions.
All right, we'll break for class today. Thank you very much.